Now, identifying learning disabilities in a school setting is a complex process. Learning disabilities cannot be seen, and therefore they often go undetected. The ripple effect of these hidden disabilities is poor performance in exams and the challenge in how to transition to the next level of education. I visited the Kenya Community Center for Learning, where I met special needs learners who have been integrated into a curriculum that balances academics and vocational training. Tonight, a look at learning disorders that go unidentified and the gaps in the Ministry of Education's focus on special education. This is the Kenya Community Center for Learning.
Why is the string family called the string family?
And here I find classes in session.
Brass or percussion? Brass. Remember?
At a glance, this looks like any other private school, but it is not. The learners here receive and process information differently.
I think people know about the traditional disabilities, those that are visible, but we have disabilities that manifest themselves in perfect ability to be able to read, write, spell, and for some even just be able to interpret written and spoken language.
The school has a total population of 85 learners in primary and secondary school. Here, the approach is different, with individualized attention to learners to identify their strengths and weaknesses.
Bulk of our students here have a condition called dyslexia. It's the most prevalent learning disability and one of the most common reason why most students fail in education. We also have children with autism. We have children with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorders. We also have a few with emotional and behavioral disorders.
Dyslexia is a learning disorder that affects ability to read, spell, write, and speak. While autism is a condition that affects communication and behavior. These disabilities, if unidentified, can impede learning in mainstream learning settings.
These conditions go unnoticed, and maybe the reason being we've just defined them as hidden disabilities. And ideally what happens is that once the child joins school at the kindergarten and you start seeing red flags, that is at that point, that is where we should have some form of screening or identification. And that kind of identification, of course, results to what we call proper interventions. But unfortunately, what happens is that in most cases, these conditions go unnoticed, they go unidentified, because I think as a country we do not have a comprehensive policy or guidelines on how to go about screening for children who are at risk early enough.
They use a string to play D.
What then would be the options available for learners who performed poorly in their Kenya Certificate of Primary Education and Kenya Certificate of Secondary Examinations due to learning disabilities? What options would be available for them to transition to the next level?
We have, of course, very limited options available, and I think the challenge is because you realize for those maybe that are already identified as having autism, the government has made quite some progress in coming up with the autism centers in the public primary schools. But unfortunately, that is not the case when they transition to the secondary schools. We have no such centers or units in the secondary schools. So already that's a big challenge, because the question is, where do these children go after primary?
As opposed to placing undue emphasis on academic success, music, sports, dance, fashion and design,
small slices,
cooking are some of the areas where these children thrive.
As a school, we have an alternative adapted curriculum, and mainly it's more of a skills-based curriculum that is quite child-centered. And you realize that individuals with learning disabilities also have immense talents. And these are the talents now that we focus on. So we actually have two programs. We have the academic program for those that are able to pursue the academic pathway, but we also have the vocational and technical pathway.
While the Ministry of Education's Kenya Institute of Special Education is mandated to conduct teacher training courses for teachers of children with special needs and disabilities, there is need to review teacher training to train teachers across the board to identify and flag down these issues in children early enough.
These are students who require almost one-on-one approach, highly individualized approach, and therefore that limits the number of the students that we can have per class and eventually overall as a school. So you realize that we can only accommodate very few students, but when you look at the cost of running such a facility where these students need more than one teacher in a class, because there are those that also need very individualized assistance. So you have some classes even having more than 2 teachers. If you look at the skills training, it's also quite an investment, because these are not the chalk and talk students. They are students who learn by doing. They are students who learn by seeing, by touching. So you've got to invest in all those learning resources.
It is imperative for the Ministry of Education to address the needs of vulnerable children and to give all children the best possible education.